Today's topic is India Budget 2020-21 at 21-22. To share his views on this important issue, we are very happy to welcome Shri Tarun Bajaj, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and a PGP 86 alum of the Institute. Welcome, Mr. Bajaj. We also have with us Professor Abhiman Das, Faculty Economics Area IMA, and Jitesh Tilotia, PGP 2004, Principal, National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. To all the participants who have joined in, please send in your questions in the Q&A section. Now I hand over the platform to Professor Das and Akhilesh to take over the questions.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Greetings from IIMA and a warm welcome to Sri Tarun Bajaj, IAS, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Today's topic is about Union Budget 21-22. Personally, I do not see the Union Budget FY 21-22 is just a continuation of the series of policy measures against the pandemic. To tell very frankly, it's a good, solid budget. Obviously, it's a part and the product of the dream team of the Ministry of Finance. It is a budget during unusual times. There were no usual slogans or catchy acronyms. No apparent change in income tax, both from individual and from firms, actually took the post-budget discussion towards the big picture, forward-looking and bold. One can see the clear IIM alumnus imprint in it, refreshingly hopeful. In many ways, this year's budget breaks various paradigms and constraints. Let me just pick 4 pointers. First, fiscal deficit. Overcoming the stipulation or the barrier of FRBM, accepting it, expressing and articulating the need for a much higher fiscal deficit was, I think, one of the biggest things. Second, the privatization. Saying it openly, what one would expect the finance minister to say it in the budget, and that happened. Third, asset monetization, telling us a path of doing it. Okay? And then maybe just to pick the 4th pointer, I could say bad bang, an idea possibly worth experimenting with. In a nutshell, the budget gave priority to stimulate growth over the fiscal consolidation. Sir, you assumed the responsibility of the Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance on May 1, 2020. What a time to take charge. Economy is shut. The country is in the face of one of the worst health and economic calamities. Uncertainty and fear is gripping the minds of people. But what an opportunity for an IIMA alumnus to take guard and take control of situations. We are super excited or keen to hear your thoughts on the thinking behind the budget and how the thinking evolved over the year of the pandemic. Without much ado, over to you, sir. Sri Tarun Bajaj, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Thank you. Again, a warm welcome.
Thank you, Professor Das. That was a nice introduction, though some of it I'll try and clarify that there are too many things that go into the budget making. So to give credit to just one person may not be the right thing to do. Let me say that before this, I was in the Prime Minister's office, so I was also looking at some of these things from there. And then in the month of May last year, I came to this department, and this is not a new department for me. I have worked in finance twice earlier, though my second stint was small because I was moved out to the Prime Minister's office. As you would imagine, the pandemic had hit us and hit us very hard. Our when I arrived here in the month of May, our expenditures, everybody was asking for money and there were no revenues. The revenue stream had just dried up. We had gone for a lockdown, and obviously during a lockdown, even the smaller revenue that could have been expected during the COVID times was not coming through. So nevertheless, we had to provide something to the vulnerable section, and we did that. Even before I arrived, the PM had announced the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, and then the series of Atmanirbhar packages started, which had a lot of direct benefits to certain people, which also had liquidity management for certain sectors, and RBI efforts were also part of it. And lastly, a slew of reforms were also ushered in during this crisis period, which I think was a nice effort by the government of the day to turn a crisis into an opportunity, or to look for opportunities even in a crisis mode. So that was important. Coming to the budget, when we were coming to the budget, our situation was improving, our revenues were looking up, we were in control of our expenditure. But the GDP would definitely have to contract, because we had a 23.9 and 7.5 contraction. So we knew that we'll have a contraction. A contraction basically means that the GDP also goes down. GDP goes down, your denominator goes down. So even if your numerator remains the same, your fiscal deficit would have gone up. But nevertheless, our numerator was also up because of the expenditure. So what do we do now? We have also announced production-linked incentive. A lot of reforms had come over. So when we sat down thinking about the budget, initially we thought that everything that we had to do had been done. But as some of you as economists had been saying during that time, that nothing but pent-up demand. So we also had some pent-up ambitions for the country. So they came tumbling out in our discussions. And I would say the political executive at this stage really had the courage to bite the bullet, and a slew of reforms that were announced even in this budget are as a result of the consent that they have given to go ahead. And as you yourself said, otherwise privatization in a country like India would not be used at the political level, but it was used very literally in the budget announcement. So then the question arose that what do we do? One thing we could have done was that we could have continued with our fiscal, or we could have tried to reduce our fiscal deficit. But as you yourself must have seen in the economic survey also, what was done was we have been almost following the cyclical and not the counter-cyclical. When the growth is low, we go for consolidation, and that further accentuates the situation. So that was one of the reasons that we said that we will go for an expansionary fiscal policy. But at the same time, we are conscious of the fact that we have to consolidate our fiscal accounts. And that is why the glide path has also been mentioned. Some of you may tell us that our glide path is not as ambitious, but at the same time, the expansionary fiscal policy, or the money that will be released through this expanded fiscal policy, will be used for productive sectors. So that's a very important aspect. We are not going to use this money for revenue expenditure, but mostly it is going to be used for capital expenditure. And the multiplier effect of a capital expenditure, as per studies done, is about 2.45 to 2.5. So our estimate is that if we are able to move on to this path till 25-26, and with a greater multiplier, and with the public investment also driving in the private investment, we should hopefully see a good growth in the coming years, and that itself should serve the purpose with which this budget has come out. And it's actually a budget for a year, but it is laying down the path that we have for the next few years. I can actually speak a little more about the budget, but since I'll leave exactly at 4, so if you are okay, rather than me speaking, there'll be a lot of questions that you would like to ask. So I'll try and cover all those points in those questions, though I have many other issues as to our 6 pillars and how we went about those 6 pillars and what we did. But I'll prefer to answer as part of my answering your question. Professor Das, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That was a very nice overview of the process, what you told before us. Maybe I can continue with one of your glide path numbers. I'll start with maybe FY21 fiscal deficit, you said around 9.5%. 22, it is 6.8, and their nominal GDP growth is estimated to be around 14.4%. And if we even assume inflation to be within the range of 4%, so then real GDP, we are expecting around 9 to 10%. So these two fiscal deficit numbers, what you have already told, we have to use them because GDP actually, shrank by 8% in FY21, and then it's normalizing in 2022. So therefore, in reality, I think the growth, what we should look for is FY23 and beyond. That's what you also say. So in this, I think my first question would be, sir, the worrying part, what comes is our experience of pre-pandemic persistent slowdown over 7-8 quarters. So against this, I think what are the maybe 3 or 4 things you could highlight that which will ensure that India achieves on an average 7 to 8% growth, say from FY23 to FY28?
Okay, continuing from what I was saying, the important part is that what is this expenditure being made for? So one of the important factors is that we have increased our capital expenditure of the central government by 34.5% in 21-22. And this is the highest increase that has ever happened in the Government of India's budget since independence. And you can assume that if it is happening this year as the highest, the base is also bigger than what the base earlier was. So in quantum terms, it is much higher. And as I said, that this higher capital expenditure is also accompanied by certain efforts. Okay, let me first come to them. What happens is, unlike the accounts that you teach us in the IMA, the accounts in the government are very, very different. So Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana, for example, is treated as a transfer from the center to the state and does not go as capital expenditure, while it is a capital expenditure for the state. So in that sense also, more than 2 lakh crores will go from Government of India to the states and to autonomous bodies, which will again be spent for capital expenditure. Apart from that, the central public sector enterprises and the state public sector enterprises will also spend money on infrastructure or capital investment as they did even in the current year when the pandemic was at its peak. The NIP, all of you know, the National Infrastructure Pipeline is one emphasis that the Government of India is giving. And we are also trying to work on PPP projects. For example, in the railways, the trains, private trains are coming under the PPP project. The Chhatrapati Shivaji Stadium, I think Gandhinagar also perhaps, if I'm not mistaken. All these stations again come on a PPP mode. So all this is nothing but inducing capital expenditure, which is having a higher multiplier effect, should lead to better growth rates, better employment, will induce private investment, will then help us in a better gross fixed capital formation. So all these efforts, in my view, would help in retaining or attaining the growth rate of 7 to 8%, and maybe more even beyond 22. We are also going for a massive privatization, which is our intent, which has been declared. So once you have this, the private sector enterprise also comes through these means and creates that extra boost to the economy. So I think this particular budget is just not saying that I'll increase my GDP by 8%. It is not a statement. In fact, we have not made a statement of 22, 23 at all. But the presumption or the assumption is what you are saying. So what we have done is we have shown you various steps that we have taken. When we talk of infrastructure, we not only talk of infrastructure where we are going to spend roads, railways, shipping, others, PPP projects, CPSCs, but also we are trying to create a financial arm, the DFI, which is being thought of as a major exercise, and that should enter the legislative forum in this coming session itself. So that will provide funds. We have provided 20,000 crores there. And if IFCL is subsumed into this, so then the capital is 30,000. With a leverage of 10, it can again go up to 3,30,000 immediately. So that is another availability. We have also created an environment, and it is already there in the finance bill, where the InvITs and REITs, which are actually getting a lot of money and working on monetization or helping in infrastructure again, they have also been entitled to borrow money from banks and from FPIs. So all that is going to help. The financing arm is being taken care of. The infrastructure is being emphasized. Privatization is being emphasized. PPPs are being done. Along with it, we will also during the course of the year come out with proposals to nudge the states also to spend more on capital. So all these efforts, in our view, would ensure and address your concern which you have for 22 onwards.
Sir, if I can take it from there, preliminary calculations suggest that the breakaway from the previously mandated FRBM targets of 3% for state and 3% for center, and the new guide path that has been shown, could potentially open up a fiscal space of upwards of 40 lakh crores over the next 5 years or so. This is almost 20% of India's GDP as things stand today. Two questions here. One is, how do we think about the absorptive capacity of India in this context? And two, there are concerns, of course, being raised with respect to the debt to GDP ratio that India could potentially have at the end of this period. So any thoughts on that?
Okay. Let me first say the 40 lakh crore. I think you had also sent me the calculation. To be very frank, I couldn't see and verify that. But to be very frank and candid with you, some of my fiscal deficit, which I was showing 3.5 or whatever, also had some items below the line. So I have not spoken about that in the budget, but that's another major plus for this budget, that now everything or 95% of the things are above the line. So to that extent, this extra thing that you're mentioning will also take care of that. Then we had a huge balloon building up in terms of the loans from NSSF to FCI, the National Small Saving Fund, to the Food Corporation of India. So we hope gradually in the next 1 or 2 years, we will bring that figure to zero and bring everything under the budget. So before I come to absorption capacity, these are something which are accounting entries, the journal entries as you teach it in the IIM Ahmedabad course. So these will not even take a second to absorb the fiscal space that has been created. But having said that, what you are saying and what I will emphasize is that we will ensure that this extra space which is being created is actually spent on infrastructure, on capital formation. That is only going to give us results. Otherwise, your fear is very valid that we can get into some stick account of the higher fiscal deficit if it does not lead to a better growth rate for us in the years to come. But I am quite hopeful, because this time also, even in spite of the pandemic, we will actually exceed the capital expenditure that we had planned at 4.10. We'll take it to about 4.39 or 35 lakh crores. Some of my sectors are actually starved of money. While what you say about absorption capacity, and I quite accept your point of view, you also have experience of working here, so you would know how things function. But your airports have been put on PPP mode, 6 of them, and you will see the change and the multiplier that they will bring and the multiplier that Airport Authority of India was bringing.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask one maybe little political economy question, sir? So basically related to inflation and bond yield and type of fiscal maths. In FY21, sir, your fiscal deficit of 9.5 also translates into government borrowing of another 80,000 crore by March 21 itself, and then another 12 lakh crore in the next year. Such a large borrowing program to begin with will put solid pressure on government bond yield, which already we are seeing. So suppose if inflation catches up, we have seen inflation is beyond RBI 6% for quite some time. Last 2 months it has come close to 4%, but we may again see uptick after March 21. So if with increase in inflation and RBI response with rate increases, there will be further pressure on the fiscal map. How will the coordination between the government and RBI work, number one? And what impact you would think this would have on the financial sector ability to finance the government?
Professor, let me say first that we are always in touch with the Reserve Bank of India. We don't give them a surprise, they don't give us a surprise. So behind the scenes, this talk keeps going. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to manage the macroeconomic of the country. I can't give a surprise to RBI in a budget saying that I'll borrow 12 lakh crores. Having said that, as you yourself said, the inflationary pressures right now are reducing a bit. I think in the month of January, we are a little above 4. But I take your point that some of the areas like the pulses, the edible oils, they are a little sticky, and the core inflation is also a little sticky, but we are hopeful, and the RBI also in its, I think, recent remarks have said that they are expecting or they are estimating the inflation to be close to about 5, if I'm not mistaken, in the year 22. So that is one thing that we are quite conscious of. And as you would know that this inflation targeting is also now part of our statement of intent. And in the month of March, we have to come out with the next 5 years, this intent. And so that itself would show that we are actually we are focused on inflation, and let me also tell you, in the recent past, there were some supply side issues. So we have taken care of some of the supply side issues, and because of which the inflation of some of the products has gone down, and also the seasonal factors where the vegetable and fruit crop, actually the new crop came out, and that reduced the pressures. I personally don't expect that this government has also been conscious of many other factors that lead to inflation. Since you've asked a political economic question, but I'll not like to answer that, but I'll definitely encourage you to look at the inflation numbers starting, say, from 2000 and see how they are moving. So you will notice a certain pattern in those inflation numbers. So we are focused towards that, and also we are expecting, as you would have seen, that the MPC is continuing to maintain the accommodative policy. So the money supply which the RBI is going to maintain is going to be easy. So we are in talks and touch with them, And I would also accept your point of view. We have certain thoughts in our mind, and we will tinker it a bit depending on how the market is behaving. And it is also the job of the central bank to ensure that the market behaves properly, which it is doing. So I'm not so desperate today that I can't live tomorrow without the money. So if the RBI cancels an auction, I'm very happy. I walk two steps ahead of them when they take a decision like that, and I'm absolutely okay with that. So I think we will cross, but we have certain ideas of what we can do if a situation so arises, and you will notice that once I come out with my next year's calendar.
Sir, it work together. One of the things that the market, especially the bond market of late, has been concerned about is how long can this accommodative policy remain in light of the large borrowings? For the government, of course, the low cost of funds is going to increasingly be important, especially as we mentioned on a higher debt to GDP ratio. But there will be pulls and pressures from the market side to see that the bond yields continue to go up given the paucity of financial savings in that sense. How would the longer term interest rate scenario play out in this case? Because the government as a large borrower now has a significant incentive in keeping interest rates and yields low. Any thoughts on how the long range could play out?
Akhilesh, okay, before I answer that question, let me also say this to you. This time when we came up with the number 9.5, it came as a surprise to most of the economists. And I don't know whether the public policy unit of IMA actually also does this work, but it'll be interesting for you to do this work. So most of you were looking at my borrowing calendar. So you said, I have announced a borrowing of 12 lakh crores. I have not gone up. This is 6%. So 6.5%, 7%. I've got many other sources from which I can fund my deficit. So those were perhaps not seen by the others. So I'm also saying this to you or hinting to you that during the course of the year and now as things stand, my sources on that side are actually increasing. So it is quite possible that I'll try and accommodate my needs based on what money I'm able to source from the other sources and only for what I actually need from the market. And even in the market, we can create a situation where we can have more number of players coming, say global bond indices. If we enter, then the passive investors come. That'll give out a lot of space to the institutions within the country. So all that is there. So that is why I say that I feel that we should be able to manage our borrowing and do that. On the interest rates, I'll say it'll depend on our inflation. If we are able to control our inflation, and which we hope we'll be able to do. And in the near term, I think the Reserve Bank of India is coming out with announcements in its MPC, after its MPC. So I feel that the benign interest rate regime will be there for some time in the country. And if you would have seen the bond issuances or even the short-term borrowing rates have really gone down, and the borrowing also has gone up. In spite of the pandemic, if you notice, the corporate bonds have really gone up, and a lot of good companies have actually raised longer tenure money at the lower rate of interest. So while we'll keep a watch on it and take steps to ensure that this continues, what you say, we'll have to keep a watch. But at this point of time, we are not overly concerned about these risks actually fructifying.
One aspect which could potentially are the rising oil prices, and I'm bringing the attention both to a current issue where high oil prices have also maybe taken some sort of a political tinge, but is an important component of revenues for both the state and the central governments. that could potentially in the near term also either have pressures on the sort of fiscal maths that has been done if there were to be some changes in the tax structures for oil. But I also want to move beyond the current year and maybe the next few years. Structurally, India is moving towards renewable energy and potentially also towards EVs, etc. And oil forms a very important component of our fiscal maths. So again, as we begin to see both the current next year or two and how the oil economy plays out for fiscal, as well as maybe over the next decade or so, how you see the oil economy impacting fiscal, would be great to get your views on that.
Akhilesh, the first thing that I want to tell you is that our taxes on oil are not ad valorem. So the duty is fixed. So to that extent, the rising prices don't help us. Yes, they help the states, no doubt about it. So that is there. The second thing is we have actually provided, I think if I'm not wrong, you can look at the figures. We have provided a lesser amount from the excise duty from oil this year than last year. And let me also say this, that the last year, the first quarter was almost under lockdown. So the oil usage was less. So I'm just saying that we have been pretty conservative there. In fact, I'm already being accused by my colleagues here that you have been very conservative and going to exceed the targets far more than what you had also anticipated, which I am seeing that trend actually happening with the way the economy is coming back. Akhilesh, I don't quite agree with this simple analysis that if tomorrow EVs come, oil goes, so I'll not get the excise duty on oil, the states will not get VAT on oil, so there'll be less revenue. If the EVs come, if the PLIs come, if the economy grows, I'll get taxes. My tax to GDP ratio, if it keeps improving, going like that, I'll get my revenues. If I don't get it from oil, I'll get it from batteries. Just to give a simple answer to your question. So that I don't think is a matter of concern. In fact, I would rather encourage or be very happy if oil becomes less. My dependence on imports will go down. If I'm able to produce these things within the country, maybe my tax revenues would only go up and not go down.
Okay, sir, if I can ask you something on the banking sector.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, this is maybe the first question will be on the proposal of bad bank. The idea of bad bank is actually there in the research or in the news for quite some time. I remember Dr. Viral Acharya was, he was in fact one of the proponents of this idea in his research before even joining the Reserve Bank of India as deputy governor. But somehow that proposal was not, I think, taking a shape in India, where Indian banking sector is struggling for many years. Okay, so suddenly we find that bad bank has turned out to be a proposal. So, it gives a kind of impression that there is some change in mind in the government. So what happens, suppose if the bad bank proposal, what has come in the budget, if that proposal fails, or it does not take off, because why I'm mentioning this, there are two key components of bad bank proposal, which are ARC, asset reconstruction company, as well as asset management companies. These are quite not so I think they're important components of the proposal, but success to those two components we are not very sure about. So if this happens, if these two components do not work, we continue to see that government is only pumping money in the terms in the form of recapitalization, or something else also you have in mind?
One thing which is there is, I think we've already pumped in maybe about 3 lakh crores as capital into the banks in the last few years. Let me also explain to you a little. what happens today is that these large loans are consortium lending. So there are 8 or 10 banks that have got together to lend, say, 2,000 crores to some house, which has gone bad. Now, what happens is the ARCs that we have in the country today are very small ARCs. Their capital is very small. So even if they are able to pick up some bad loans from a bank, they'll pick up that loan from 3 banks. The rest of the 7 banks have not given their loan to this ARC. Now, if there is a buyer for this loan, he has to go to ARC and to go to these 7 people. Then you need a certain percentage of votes to make it a success. So this process takes such a long time that it does not fructify, or it does not result in good outcomes, and go through the IBC route or whatever we do. Now, under this, the loans will compulsorily go into ARC. So you will deal with the ARC. Then there will be an expert who will deal with this asset in terms of trying to bring that asset back to life. So we are hopeful that this experiment will try, not an experiment, but something which has been tried elsewhere in the world, that we would be successful in this. Secondly, what we have thought is that the government is not part of any of this. So that is the biggest thing. Even if the public sector banks or private sector banks together form this ARC by putting in their capital, government is not there, so you are not a prisoner of the indecision, which is because of certain factors in the government. So you can actually bring in your, the ARC can actually, or AMC can bring in any private individual to run these structures. So they would be running these structures. And our expectation is that in any case, these loans are bad. 80 to 85% has already been provided for. So if we get them out of the balance sheet of a bank, the bank's balance sheet improves. The bank doesn't need to concentrate on this toxic asset, which is causing it so much of concern. It can actually concentrate on lending further. So it will help in all those things. These are what we have thought of. This is the thought behind this whole proposal. And it has been discussed with the IBA, which is the Indian Banks Association. And I think my colleague in the financial services is in advanced discussions which were going on with the central bank, Reserve Bank of India. Their consent would definitely be needed. So we are quite hopeful that this model should work for certain loans that we want to put in here. It should help banks. And then also it will help my other effort, which is privatization of banks. So once these bad loans are out of the bank's balance sheet, the valuation of that bank would definitely go up. So it would also help me there. You're on mute.
Yes, another follow-up question, sir. You ended up with privatization. I just take from there is, just to, give you, or get our memory back, the success of Indian banks privatization, if we look at now, we will find that it is kind of mixed. Successful private banks of today are actually in the public sector earlier. ICICI, HDFC, UTI, they are in the public sector. So that's why, because we do have successful other banks like Kotak, but many other private banks which came after liberalization actually went off the market quite, not even 10 years they could sustain. So in this background, it is argued that a more effective result can be produced if a public sector character is retained and operational freedom and ownership are separated. This is an age-old saying, but I still, look for your views on this, because our success on this has been really mixed.
I don't know. For example, I think HDFC Bank was a private bank to start with. It was not a public sector bank at any stage.
It was not a public sector bank, but it had a public sector entity earlier. So they started from a public sector feature, and then the move to the private sector as a bank.
Okay, I'm not too sure. Maybe I'm not right on that. But you are now comparing that I changed the governance structure of the public sector banks versus privatizing the public sector banks. You know, I have also thought of it. My colleagues have also put in their mind into it. The first thing is, somebody who has worked in the government will understand that this is a very theoretical construct. I don't want to take names, but when it happened in the private sector, they were shaken what happens to us all the time. So it's not, even if you have, even if I agree with you that you have, and I have been in the financial services sector, and let me say that during those period of 2006 to 2010, there was no interference as such. The boards used to decide, the economy was looking up, the bank's balance sheet was growing very nicely. But we had major problems after that because some of the loans that were given during that time did not produce good results. Then there are other constraints. For example, we have the CCC menace that we have. So that is always weighing on our heads whenever we sign a particular file or we sign a particular loan. So that, having said that, I would say that it is not that Government of India is saying that I'll not have public sector banks. We will have a good number of public sector banks. And a public sector bank, unlike any other industry, suppose I feel that State Bank of India is there, and in the Northeast, I need more branches or I need more penetration, State Bank of India can enter there. So even if Eastern Bank has gone into the private sector, withdrawn from that place, I can always fill that place. So I think there is no conflict. There is no reason for me to have, now I think I have 12 banks after merger. Earlier I had many number of banks. I can do with about 4 to 6 big banks who will compete with the private sector and let the private sector enterprise come in. If you see HDFC, ICICI and Axis Bank, ICICI and Axis basically moved into banking space out of the public sector, but they have actually expanded. They have also gone through their problems, but they have definitely expanded and contributed to the development of the economy. So I think this is a step where we would like to see some support from the thinkers like you, or because it is not an easy thing to implement such a thing. That's it from me.
Sir, if I can take the conversation to a different direction. India is now in a unique and a happy position of having $600 billion of reserves. We're just touching that number. Our external debt, at least at the sovereign level, is reserve. So we are now a net creditor nation. Is there any thinking on how some of these reserves could be deployed potentially within the economy, maybe onto infrastructure, which has been one of the key focus areas and push for the government? Because from the 1991 era, when we had one fortnight worth of import cover, we are now at almost 18 to 20 months worth of import cover. Are we sitting on significantly surplus reserves, and can they be deployed differently within the country?
I'm not too sure what you're saying is because our reserves have not been built on current account surpluses. Basically, a lot of this money is actually debt or equity which has come into the country, and it is in that sense, in the economic sense, transitory and can actually move out of the country depending on what the situation outside the country is or within the country is. And so that is the first aspect when you look at how to utilize this money. And utilizing this money within the country would also mean that you've already pushed in money into the economy once, and if you use it again, you're again pushing in money into the economy again. So in case we ever decide to do anything like that, we'll have to take RBI also. But I think at the moment there is nothing. And just to give you an instance of the past, if you recall, we had created one SPV of SIDBI in London, where the money was provided, some $5 billion or something, to be deployed for purchases from outside the country and not within the country. That means once the dollars come into my country, reach the RBI coffers, RBI has actually released that much of rupees into the economy. So that is also an economic thing that needs to be looked into. And the second important thing is the fact that this is FPI money, for example. We have got huge FPI. So if FPI starts suddenly moving out as it started moving out 5 days before the budget, so you might have the reserves depleting at that stage. That's it.
I am hoping if the oil thesis continues and we become less import dependent and our current account trajectory changes over the course of this decade, and we'll revisit this question then.
Akhilesh, let me tell you, this PLI scheme, we have also seen, we had the MEIS scheme. MEIS scheme was, we were pushing in so much of money into MEIS, but our exports are not seeing the same kind of trajectory. So the PLI scheme has been thought of and there's a lot of demand. And PLI scheme, unlike any other scheme, since you've seen the government, is outcome oriented. If you produce, you get it. If you don't produce, you don't get it. It is not an input. आप factory लगाइए, आपको हम पैसा देंगे. It is only when you produce a mobile phone will you get it. So if you will produce it only if it can make money. So I should get more taxes, and the more you produce, I would say the more value addition you will do. So what we are actually seeing that if this is a successful step policy by us, we should see that improvements happen. In fact, we would be proved wrong with the revenues actually going up much more than what we have anticipated. So let's see what happens 5 years down the line.
Okay, Akhilesh, maybe my last question from my side, because there is not much of time left and we need to take questions from the floor. Sir, maybe the last question on jobs. So, we have articulated quite well, both in public discourse as well as in political discourse. 5 trillion economy 2024 or Atmanirbhar Bharat program. How do these two goals tie in with creating employment for India's youth? Or in other way, if you take the question, how should the students of IIMA or youth in general, should focus job for next maybe 1 decade or so?
Okay, I'll talk later, but they will look for some other jobs. But I think I'll just repeat what I've already said. If the economy is looking up, the multiplier effect, then all sectors of the economy start growing. Once they start growing, you have formal, informal jobs coming up, direct, indirect jobs coming up. And that should, and if the manufacturing hub actually succeeds, which we hope will succeed, that itself will create a good number of jobs. So the fact that I'm spending money not on revenue, but on capital, the fact that I'm creating assets which are going to have a multiplier effect will not only come through this process, it will also need the human capital. So the jobs will also come along with it. So I think this is all linked to this whole thought process which this budget has got it. And I think we should get the jobs. But I'm not too sure whether they look at anything below. We used to look at, my batch used to look at Citibank that time. It was Citibank then. And now I don't know what are the A-class companies that are fought for by the IIMA graduates. Not on the policy side, but on the PGP side.
Sir, I think one interesting opportunity that is opening up is within the city of Ahmedabad. Three budgets that have been significant aircraft leasing and financing. City panning out, and what are the visions for GIFT City? Thoughts on that would be useful.
You're very right. So what used to happen was that if I want to raise ECBs, I would go to somebody outside the country. So India is such a vast country. My needs are so large. So we thought that here is we can create a GIFT City or an IFSC that would cater to also the domestic players who actually go much beyond to trade or to for those financial services which can actually be given in the IFSC itself. So over a period of time, and this year we have done it a little more thoroughly, we actually looked at what are the facilities available to, say, a State Bank of India branch in outside the country, say Mauritius or wherever they are. So we found that there were certain things that they could still do better than what FSC bank branch could do. So those arbitrages have been taken care of. At the same time, we have also taken care of the fact that we don't convert this region into a tax haven. So the benefits have been given for a certain period, and benefits have only been given what are available in the jurisdictions which are very well regulated. So I think it's coincidental that there were two news items about IFSC today, one on the aircraft leasing and one, I think, on the rupee derivative trading. So in the times to come, we are definitely going to see a lot of activity there. Some bank branches, insurance companies are already applying, and I was in a different session where one of the foreign banks said, I don't remember the name, that they are going to set up their, they call it an outsource activity or something, global in-house activity or something, that they are going to set up there. So that is also, it is not a very high in terms of the intellect or in terms of the value add, but definitely it also provides a lot of employment. The numbers are very large. Global in-house facility, as they call it. So all their work, back-end work, will perhaps be done in this place. So IFSC is a good thing. We have taken it as a challenge, and from this year onwards, for the next few years, we will definitely support IFSC from the Government of India. It is, and we have appointed a chairman. That itself has helped, because he's 24/7 now involved in regulation and doing a lot of things. Even the aircraft leasing will bring there. We are also bullion, for example. We are the second largest consumer of gold, and we don't do anything in gold. So they are already doing it. In the next 4 to 6 months, we'll see some trading in gold there. And you also must have seen that we are now, this year also announced in the budget that we'll create a gold exchange in the country, and SEBI will be the regulator for the same.
We are conscious of the time, sir. We have one question from the audience, which I thought we will bring to you. The question is from Mr. Tarun Jain, and his point comes from the large talk of negative yield that the world is seeing right now. And his question is, why do we not encourage more investments, foreign investments coming in, either at a sovereign level or at an infrastructure level? Can we bring that into the ecosystem?
Tarun, let me tell you that good you asked me this question. Otherwise, this would have left my discourse on the budget. We are actually providing some benefits to the sovereign wealth funds and the pension funds to come and invest in infrastructure in the country. So we have provided them some tax incentives for 4 years, and they are actually investing a lot of money into not only infrastructure but other areas. So that money is coming, and I don't have the exact statistics at the moment, but our FDI and FPI both in the current year is greater than what it was in the last year. So that also is growing quite well. In terms of, I don't know if you mean the government borrowing from the outside, there were some issues that we tried 2 years ago. So there were some issues there. But at the same time, if we enter the global bond indices, we will get that money, but we'll get that money at our interest rates. So the foreign exchange currency risk will not lie with us to that extent. So I think what you say is advantage of that lower yields is definitely being taken.
Thank you so much, sir. I will just request Suhail to close the meeting. Suhail is the alumni lead for the Public Policy Alumni Special Interest Group.
Thank you, Akhilesh. Thank you very much, Shri Tarun Bajaj. It's a very insightful, very candid conversation. And thank you to Professor Das and Akhilesh for hosting this very wonderful discussion. I mean, clearly, this is a very important budget, and it comes at such a critical time for India. I mean, some other countries have recently come out with their annual budgets. I was looking at those: the European Union, Singapore, UAE, Saudi, a few others. All of those are very prudent, but ours stands apart a little bit in the sense that it has this long-range, very reformist DNA to it, which makes it fascinating. It's a great experiment at a very historic time. Shri Bajaj, you made so many nuanced points in this conversation. It showed us how multi-layered and complex not only the budget was, but also the budget, I think the formulation process, the concept. So you brought in all these angles and different aspects. The balance between FRBM and growth, Atmanirbhar, how to boost that, how to increase capital expenditure, the massive focus on privatization, special attention to infrastructure and other sectors, healthcare, financial services. Some very nice discussions in this very brief webinar, ranging across, the bad bank, private banks. There was this discussion on oil and electric vehicles, the forex reserves aspect, how to link to jobs, Gift City, SEBI's gold exchange, incentives to sovereign wealth funds and pension funds. Fascinating conversation. So, I think Shri Bajaj has summarized the webinar himself. So to quote him, the budget has ushered in a slew of reforms aimed at turning this crisis into an opportunity. I think that was a beautiful way of putting it. And it's a budget that's for 1 year, but it lays out the roadmap for the next few years. And I think that compass will be very helpful for us as we navigate our very uncertain future. So thank you again, Shri Bajaj. Thank you to all the panelists, the IMA Alumni Office, Anurag, Vidhi Desai. We had over 50 active participants. Thank you to all. We will summarize this webinar into a note, capturing the key takeaways, and we will close now. So thank you everybody once again. Enjoy your week.
Thank you, Suhail. Thank you, Professor Das, and thank you, Akhilesh. It was wonderful interacting with all of you and trying to remember my good days that I spent there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.